Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, I wanted to give you a quick start destruction warlock PvP guide. We're going to be jumping into one of the most difficult situations to deal with and how I navigated it to be able to get to 2400 rating pretty much overnight. I was able to get it in less than 100 rounds, so these tactics are proven to work. Now, double melee DPS are going to be the most frustrating situations when you get a lobby like this with an enhancement shaman, a death knight, and a warrior. So I'm going to run down exactly what you need to be doing step by step in order to achieve a victory against this. Now, the first part of the game is to stay on your mount. You want the enemy attackers to waste as much mobility as possible or damage onto your partners as you can. This is not about maximizing your damage. It's about limiting the uptime of the melee DPS. So right now you can see the enhancement shaman, he's busy wasting spells with my warrior, and the death knight is literally doing nothing. So this is an ideal situation. I can just continue to stay out of the fight, wait till they've dismounted, wait till they've used some of their freedom, some of their mobility to get to me, and I can use the mount and the pillar to be able to stagger and delay that as much as possible. Again, main focus is just make sure two melee DPS are never connecting to you at the same time. I'm repositioning towards the demonic gateway. Now we've got the shaman by himself, so we're going to dismount, drop 2-dimensional rifts for our opening burst, and you want to make sure that your shadow burns go on cooldown as soon as possible. These are going to be your main soul shard spenders when you're getting trained by melee DPS. You do want to focus on landing interrupts on the healer. We've interrupted the healer with spell lock. We've managed to randomly fake an interrupt. We're going to go for a double coil after interrupting the healer. This forces the shaman to trinket. Now we portal away here, even despite the barrier, and the main reason that we've portaled is because the shaman is proc Descendants, and you're probably not going to survive through any amount of damage reduction when an enhancement shaman procs Descendants. I'd rather portal, get out of there. The barrier is giving defense to my warrior anyways. It's still getting value, and I can just completely avoid the fight. Unless I have crowd control like a double coil, double shadow fury, or infernal, I don't want to tank their cooldowns. It's not about how much damage you can do. It's about how much damage you can avoid. So here we're going to call in the infernal. That's going to land a double stun, and we're going to play shadow rift. So infernal stun, shadow rift, and teleport them away from me. This is going to get them to use mobility spells that then later they won't have to reconnect to me when I want to use my soul burn portal. And you do want to make sure you're always using soul burn before portaling, because it's going to remove snares and let you kite. We're keeping shadow burn on cooldown. We're focusing on the enhancement shaman, conflagrate and shadow burn, and keep immolate up as kind of your main staple here. We get a double stun, so I go for a chaos bolt. Pay attention to your partners. If they're landing crowd control, this can be a good time to sneak in a chaos bolt, and it's definitely really valuable when you can. Now we can't really cast, so conflagrates and shadow burns, instant incinerate procs, and even with just that, we're forcing, astral shifts from the shaman. We're going to use our soul burn. We're going to port back behind the pillar, and we're just going to avoid the shaman and the death knight. I don't want to tank 2 melee DPS for too long, so just go back behind the pillar. If I need to, I can soul burn hellstone here because my priest is having a hard time getting back to me with the chains of ice. So I've got my soul burn. I'm going to hellstone back to full so the priest doesn't have to panic and run into a bad position chasing me. We're avoiding the death knight because the death knight will use chains of ice on us. It's going to be a super snare, so I can avoid the shaman and tank the shaman easier than I can getting towards the death knight. So I chose to go left, and here I've just completely avoided them. This entire time our priest is crowd controlled, and they've effectively done very little, or they would get died by the sword from our warrior, which is still, ideal in our current situation. And we're just waiting for our havoc. We're going to drop a rift onto the death knight, try and keep those rolling, try and get our immolates up when there aren't a lot of interrupts around. And generally I never fake immolate. If you get kicked on it, you can just cast other spells, so don't waste your time fake casting immolate. Just get it up and then start doing damage. Dump our shadow burns out. We've got our havoc coming off cooldown in a moment. We're going to port out of the anti-magic zone. We don't want to attack into that. It's going to reduce our damage significantly, so it forces a death grip. But the soul burn effect is still keeping us immune to snares, so we can kite back to our gateway and get some distance. Look for a fear onto the paladin here. It's on DR, but we've got pressure with 2 players at half health and a bladestorm going on, so I want a little bit of extra crowd control. We got the havoc. We got double coil available. We're going to launch out that double coil, and we're just going to use instant casts. We could chaos bolt here, but I just wanted to make sure that I get guaranteed damage, no shenanigans at all. But definitely chaos bowling during the coils is going to be a good time. I see a lightning lasso being casted, so I got a choice here. I could CS lightning lasso, or I could save my CS for the holy paladin. I think I chose to save it for the paladin because generally as our comp it's going to be pretty tough to get crowd control. Now I should have CS'd this flash of light here. CSing that flash of light with a shockwave onto both the shaman and the death knight would have been sick. Now we're going to use shadow rift. We're going to port the death knight and the shaman off of ourselves, and look, we've got a lot of extra distance. We can stay out in the open. Paladin's got a precog proc, but here comes doom winds from the shaman. You do not don't want to tank this icon right here, especially with Unholy Nova. When these icons start popping up, those DPS are scary. We need to port, we need to kite away. He grips me, but we have the soul burn effect, so we're still immune to snares, and we're just dumping our shadow burns. We're going to go for a Shadow Fury. If you get kicked on this, you can Chaos Bolt. Death Knight anti-magic zones, but the Shadow Fury on Shaman, Fear on Paladin isolates him, and we can start getting aggressive because I'm kind of forced to fight, right? I got no port, I got no gate, so here we've just got to trade cooldowns and do damage when you're in this situation if this ever happens. So lob me out as much as I can. We force Divine Shield. We get knocked out into the open, and then we just get gripped back and away, but we don't want to move too far away from our portal. We've got Havoc available. We're just sending it for damage here. We tried to spell lock. Looks like we ended up missing it, unfortunately, so it's going to be a bit sad. I think he Aura Mastered it here, which is really unfortunate. Definitely want to be paying attention to that. But we're still just dumping Conflagrates. We're going to Soulburn Port. We're down at half health. Again, just avoid damage. Let the Warrior create the pressure. Let Dampening start stacking up because your main advantage is that you're ranged and you can do damage from ranged. So you just want to make sure they're not getting melee uptime for as much as possible. Shadowburn's coming in. We've got a coil. It's only a single target coil, but the Shaman has Bloodlust up, and I don't really want to get hit. Unfortunately, it's Solo Shuffle, so we overlap Shockwave. You don't want to overlap CCs like that, but our Priest gets a triple Fear off the triple Shockwave. Shaman is isolated. I've got Shadowburn charges. I've got Conflagrates available. We've got fast cast Chaos Bolt. This is the one time where you would want to cast Chaos Bolt, is after you've spent enough soul shards, your Chaos Bolt basically becomes instant. You can see as soon as that happens, we shoved it in and we were able to easily clock him out. Now, the next round, which is going to be a little bit tougher, right, because we don't have Mortal Strike. This is going to be the same game plan, though. The game's going to start, gateway down, portal down, we're on our mount. And we're just going to stay on our mount, and we're going to avoid them as long as possible. This works really effectively at low rating as well, because people just get tired of trying to chase you, and they waste their time attacking someone else and forget you're in the game, and then you can start playing. So this is like a secret tactic you definitely want to try and exploit in these lobbies, is just stay on your mount as long as possible. Like even right now, right? The Warrior's Chains of Ice far away from me. Now I'm going to dismount because I'm out of range of my port, and this forces the Warrior to use a charge. Now he's got one mobility cooldown down. I can port away from the Blade Storm. Again, don't try and pop offensive cooldowns. Just avoid the damage in the opener. You're not going to outtrade any of these melee DPS. I'm getting dots up onto the pet, trying to get soul shard generation off of anything that comes into my line of sight, and I'm just waiting for their cooldowns to be over. I see the Death Knight get a double blind, so I peek my head over to get into line of sight because I'd really like to start getting crowd control. Here, this is a tactic Warriors will do. When they see Havoc go out, they'll spell reflect, so you got to be careful when you put Havoc out, because right here I got reflected on my coil, and that's probably like worst case scenario, because usually it'll force the Warrior to trinket if you land it. So when you cast Havoc, you want to make sure that you use weakness almost immediately after on the Warrior, or when you see spell reflect, because most of them are just, as soon as that pops up, they're going to press spell reflect, which is something I learned at the end of this round. Here we get the Warrior by himself, which is fine, so we're going to pop cooldowns and trade. We're okay to tank one melee DPS. The Shaman's Chains of Ice getting gripped over here, not able to connect, so I'm just going to go 1v1 with the Warrior, and with the Priest healing me and the Paladin getting CC'd, he's going to lose the 1v1, so I'm going to start dropping my rifts, start getting pressure, but Shaman proc Descendants, we immediately port. We're no longer going to keep trying to go. As soon as I see this cooldown, I'm out. This is just reaction time. As soon as I see offensive cooldown, I am out. I know I will evaporate to that. I can't tank it. I can't trade. I need to get out. So portal, line of sight, get behind the pillar. I'm avoiding the Warrior on the right, moving forward towards the left. We have spell lock here for the Hex. We could lock it, but he was already in a rep, so I didn't think it was too big of a deal. We end up getting stunned and caught here, and this is where we're going to have to wall. If you're stunned with no trinket, you don't have port, healer is CC'd, that's generally going to be the best case scenario to use your Unending Resolve. Here now you can see Spell Reflect. We just got Immolate going. It's going to get consumed by a random Penance tick. But he instantly used that Reflect when I had Havoc, even though Coil wasn't still off cooldown. So we're just using Havoc for damage. We get knocked away, but it's honestly not that bad. It's probably going to force one of the mobility cooldowns, so we get charged from the Warrior. Shaman charges over as well. We're going to Haymaker the Warrior. This is going to knock the Warrior really far away, and I'm going to get gripped. And you can see damage is not super high in a matchup like this, but we're just trying to stagger the fight, get them into a bad position, get them to a point where they get exhausted of chasing me, and as soon as that happens, we can start getting really offensive. We get a coil here, we've dumped our shadow burns, we've dumped our conflagrates. I'm just looking to spam fear while the shaman's running over and be as annoying as possible. Warriors used to charge. We got a choice here where we could use shadow rift or we could soul burn port, so we could either teleport the enemies off of ourselves or we can port ourselves. The other option is to also run big gateway. I think I started opting to run big gateway. Here we get a triple blind, so I was like, hey, I can shadow rift them off this triple blind, so I'm going to use that instead of soul burn port. That sends them all back into the corner. This is going to force them to use mobility. They're taking damage from dots. They're getting chains of ice. They're getting annoyed. It's forcing freedoms outside of my port window, so it's going to be really good. I see Hex being casted, so I'm going to soul burn port, back off into the corner, get my immolates off onto the other side of the map, and if they reconnect, I've got my gateway, which is why I'm playing forward and not running out of line of sight. I want to make sure that I can move forward to the gateway if I need, but I'm standing max range to still do damage and just focusing on instant casts and not stressing out too much about going for anything else. Now, the Warrior's by himself. He's only attacking me, so I'm just going to stand still, tanking for a little bit and try and get some interrupts and get some damage. If the shaman jumps over, I immediately gate. I'm not spending any amount of time with 2 melee DPS hitting me if I can. And if I get caught, I'm trading major defensive cooldowns. Warrior's Blade Storming on me, but again, it's just the warrior. He gets gripped away. Now I'm in a position where I can probably cast some spells. We're going to go for Havoc. He's probably going to Spell Reflect as he sees that Havoc go up, but we're just using Havoc here mostly for damage. Probably could have honestly staggered it. As soon as the warrior and shaman get to me though, I'm porting. I'm back on the other side of the map. I'm completely avoiding their connection and just staying on the opposite side. Now you could use Curse of Exhaustion if you don't have something like a Death Knight using Chains of Ice in this position, trying to get Immolates up onto the Spirit Wolves, get our Soul Shard generation so we can spend our Shadow Burns when we need to. We get Dimensional Rifts coming off cooldown. We're getting into a much better position offensively, but Blade Storm, but it's just the warrior. Shaman's coming over though and getting pretty close. We don't have Shadow Rift. We've got a Coil, so we're going to use Coil instead to control one of the melee and make sure that it's only one of the attackers on me at any given moment. We're going to Shadow Burn the shaman, try and keep distance away from him with the Coil. We're really just waiting for our port to come up, or our priest is going to have to use a major defensive cooldown in this type of situation because our mobility is pretty limited. We get stunned, so right here is like a life swap or a pain sup. So life swap comes through from the priest with Desperate Prayer that recovers us for a moment, and we're just going to soul burn port. Both melee connecting, I'm getting out. I'm not worried about doing damage. Just keep Immolates up when I can and make sure that when they're both connecting, I'm using mobility. We're going to toss some damage onto the paladin. Again, sometimes you have to attack whatever's just in your line of sight, and then opt to go for a fear. He gets gripped anyway, so we're not going to get it. Keep the Immolates rolling, Conflagrates over onto the shaman. We've got a fast cast Chaos Bolt. We're looking for a Shadow Fury because it's just 1 melee DPS. Even though I'm really low right now, I'm choosing to post and cast more and just do damage and stay away from the other melee because you're not going to die generally to 1 melee DPS. Get that fast Chaos Bolt out, get the Shadow Burn, get the Conflagrates, keep pressure going onto the shaman. Paladin's in a really tough position, and even though we haven't done like an insane amount of damage overall in the game, at this critical moment when dampening gets high, we got the moment where we could finally cast, and it was because the warrior wasn't able to get back to us, and that's ideally what we were trying to create in the match, is just be as untouchable as possible, and then squeeze out your crowd control and offensives during the times where it's only 1 melee DPS connecting to you, and ideally 0 melee DPS. There are little tweaks here I would make it to improvements of my own game. This is something I'd recommend that you do for yourself, is watch your gameplay back, keeping things like Curse of Tongues in the Paladin. Would be really good in these types of matchups, and trying to land more spell locks onto the Holy Paladin would be kind of pointers to myself, to my past self, having watched this VOD back. But hope you guys enjoyed this quick start guide to Destruction. It's an absolute blast of a spec, probably easily, I would say maybe the most well-designed spec of them in the game right now. It's just super fun, super powerful, really well-versed and versatile. So hope you guys have fun, and I will see you in the next one.